Blood dripped from Imani Foster's temple as she stared at the officer writhing on the asphalt. Her Glock still warm in her hand. Sirens wailed in the distance. "Ma'am, what have you done?" gasped the rookie cop, backing away. Imani smiled. "I just served justice, son." If you've ever wondered what happens when the system pushes someone too far, stick around for this incredible true story. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to support stories that expose the truth beneath the surface. Now, let's rewind to see how a routine traffic stop turned into a fight for justice that would change an entire community forever. The evening had settled comfortably around Oak Ridge as Imani Foster guided her 10-year-old Honda Civic through the familiar streets toward home. At 54, the community college professor had spent decades perfecting her routine morning preparation teaching African American history classes until evening, then the quiet drive home through neighborhoods that had watched her age with dignity. Tonight, however, that routine would shatter beneath red and blue lights flashing in her rearview mirror. Imani checked her speedometer, 43 in a 45 zone, before carefully pulling to the shoulder hands positioned at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, as she'd always instructed her students when discussing police interactions. Her window lowered with a mechanical whir as two officers approached one, hanging back near the patrol car's hood. "License and registration," the approaching officer demanded without preamble, his flashlight beam deliberately angled to blind rather than illuminate. Imani recognized Officer James Rankin immediately, his reputation for targeting black drivers well known throughout Oak Ridge's African American community. "Good evening, officer," she responded with practiced calm movements, deliberate, as she reached slowly for her documents. "May I ask why I've been stopped?" Rankin's face hardened beneath his crew-cut jaw muscle pulsing. "You were driving erratically, crossing the center line multiple times." The accusation hung obvious and absurd between them. Behind him, the younger officer, Kevin Torres according to his nameplate, shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between his partner and their surroundings. "I've been driving straight home from the college, officer. I'm certain I maintained my lane properly," Imani replied, extending her license and registration with steady hands. Rankin snatched the documents, studied them with exaggerated scrutiny, then suddenly stiffened. Recognition flashed across his features as he read her name. He turned toward Torres, beckoning him closer with a sharp jerk of his head. "This is the one," he whispered, face angled away from Imani, but words carrying clearly in the night stillness. "Chief mentioned her." Torres frowned, slightly confusion evident as Rankin returned his attention to Imani. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." His tone had shifted from routine harassment to something darker, more targeted. "May I ask why that's necessary, Officer Rankin? I've provided my documentation as requested." Imani maintained her composure, though her mind raced through possibilities. Rankin's face twisted with barely contained contempt. "I smell marijuana coming from this vehicle. We'll need to conduct a search." The lie was transparent. Imani didn't even take aspirin for headaches. "Officer, I don't consent to any searches without a warrant. There are no drugs in my vehicle or on my person." Her words remained measured, despite the adrenaline now coursing through her system. Torres looked increasingly uncomfortable, hand resting near but not on his weapon as he glanced up and down the empty street. "You're not exactly in a position to refuse Professor Foster," Rankin sneered, emphasizing her title with mockery. "Either step out voluntarily or I'll remove you myself." His hand moved deliberately to his holster, unfastening the safety strap. Something in his posture, in the eagerness beneath his professional veneer, triggered decades-old instincts in Imani. This wasn't random harassment. This was targeted, planned. "Officer Torres," she called calmly to the younger cop, "I'd like to request a supervisor at this scene. I believe Officer Rankin is escalating the situation unnecessarily." Torres opened his mouth to respond when Rankin suddenly lunged forward, yanking Imani's door open with such force the hinges groaned. "Out now!" His hand moved to his weapon as Imani unfastened her seatbelt with a deliberate slowness. "I'm complying, officer. No need for—" The sound of metal clearing leather interrupted her words. A gun was drawn. In the confusion that followed, a shot cracked through the night air, echoing against nearby houses. But whose finger had pulled the trigger first remained momentarily unclear as the routine traffic stop exploded into chaos. Shattered glass sparkled like diamonds across the asphalt as the echo of gunfire faded into wailing car alarms and distant dog barks. Imani pressed her palm against her temple, blood seeping between her fingers from a bullet graze that had missed ending her life by mere centimeters. Officer Rankin lay sprawled on the ground 3 feet from her car door, cursing through clenched teeth as blood darkened his uniform at the shoulder and thigh. His service weapon had skittered beneath Imani's Honda, while hers remained firmly in her grip barrel, now pointed carefully toward the ground. "Drop the weapon! Drop it now!" Officer Torres screamed, his own gun drawn but visibly shaking. His young face contorted with panic and indecision as he attempted to process the scene before him. His partner bleeding on the ground, a middle-aged black woman, standing with remarkable composure despite her own injury and the disturbing precision of the wounds Rankin had sustained. Not kill shots. Intentionally disabling. "She tried to murder me," Rankin howled, writhing dramatically despite wounds that had carefully avoided arteries. "Shoot her, Torres. That's a direct order." Imani slowly raised her non-gun hand palm outward in a calming gesture. "Officer Torres, I'm going to place my weapon on the ground and step back. I acted in self-defense when Officer Rankin drew his weapon without cause. I'm not a threat to you." Her movements followed with military precision, gun placed carefully on the ground, 3 measured steps backward, hands rising to interlock behind her head in perfect arrest position. Torres stared in bewilderment at her stance. Not the awkward compliance of a civilian, but the practiced efficiency of someone with tactical training. Sirens crescendoed as responding units converged on the scene, painting the neighborhood in pulsing red and blue. Within minutes, 6 patrol cars formed a perimeter, 12 officers with weapons drawn, creating a wall of potential death around Imani. "On your knees, now." The shouted commands came from multiple directions as Imani complied without hesitation, movements fluid despite her age, knees meeting pavement as medics rushed to Rankin's side. His voice rose above the chaos performance, reaching dramatic heights. "She was waiting for me. Ambush. Check her background. She's some kind of terrorist." Among the responding officers, Detective Vanessa Washington pushed through the crowd, dark eyes sharp, as they assessed the scene with professional detachment. Unlike her colleagues, Washington approached without drawn weapon badge prominent on her blazer. "Secure the scene properly," she barked at the uniformed officers, gawking at Rankin's theatrical moaning. "And someone get medical attention for Ms. Foster immediately." Washington knelt beside Imani, noting the perfect positioning of her hands, the controlled breathing, the analytical gaze cataloging every officer present. "You're bleeding, Ms. Foster." Superficial wound detective, Officer Rankin's shot grazed rather than penetrated. "I'd estimate 3 stitches required no significant blood loss or cranial damage." The clinical self-assessment raised Washington's eyebrows as medics finally approached bandaging Imani's temple while officers secured her in handcuffs. "I'll need your statement about what happened here," Washington said, producing a recorder. Imani shook her head once. "With respect, Detective, I'll provide my full statement once legal representation is present." More officers descended on Imani's vehicle, one shouting about a dashcam malfunction that had apparently occurred just as Rankin approached the driver's window. Washington's frown deepened as she noted the convenient timing. As Imani was escorted to a patrol car, local news vans began arriving, reporters clutching microphones and cameramen jostling for angles. Black woman opens fire on police during routine traffic stop. One reporter was already broadcasting the narrative, forming before any investigation had begun. From her position in the back of the police cruiser, Imani watched Rankin being loaded into an ambulance, his groans reaching theatrical volumes whenever cameras pointed his way. Their eyes met briefly across the chaotic scene, his filled with hatred, hers with calm recognition. This was far from over. At the hospital, Rankin held court from his treatment room uniform shirt dramatically displayed with bloodstains strategically positioned for maximum effect. "I approached the vehicle using standard procedure," he told the cluster of reporters allowed inside, despite protocol violations. "She was belligerent from the start, refusing commands, and then just opened fire without warning." Torres stood in the hallway outside, face troubled, as he listened to his partner's account, an account that diverged significantly from what he'd witnessed. His fingers worried the edge of his notepad where his initial statement waited to be submitted, the truth caught in his throat. Back at the precinct, Detective Washington reviewed preliminary evidence with growing concern. The dash cam footage showed Rankin and Torres approaching Imani's vehicle, then conveniently cut to static at the crucial moment. The body cam footage from both officers showed similar technical difficulties. Too many coincidences for Washington's comfort, especially as preliminary ballistics suggested the first shot came from Rankin's weapon, not Imani's. As dawn broke over Oak Ridge, social media exploded with hashtags condemning the cop shooter comment sections filled with racial slurs and calls for justice against the violent black woman who attacked our officers. And the system was already closing ranks, the narrative solidifying before investigation had barely begun, and Imani Foster sat in detention, eyes closed in meditation, preparing for the battle ahead. 23 years earlier, deep in an undisclosed location in Afghanistan's mountainous border region, Master Sergeant Imani Foster crouched motionless in the shadows, watching through night vision as enemy combatants paced near their captives. 3 American aid workers knelt in the dirt, blindfolded, and bound unaware that their rescue was moments away. "Hydra 1 in position," she whispered into her comm unit. The specialized Delta Force team she commanded spread strategically around the compound. What followed was a masterclass in precision warfare. 4 targets neutralized silently, 3 hostages extracted, 0 civilian casualties. It was this surgical efficiency that had made Foster legendary within circles that didn't officially exist. The classified operation added another commendation to her file, a file so heavily redacted that only those with the highest clearance knew the full extent of her 2-decade military career. Operations in 14 countries, specialist in hostage extraction and counterterrorism, trained in 7 martial arts disciplines and proficient with 23 weapon systems, fluent in 5 languages. One of the first women to complete Delta Force selection, breaking barriers while accumulating a service record that read like fiction. But her illustrious career ended not with honors, but with betrayal, when she reported her commanding officer, Colonel Richard Maxwell, for authorizing an unnecessary drone strike that killed 17 civilians to eliminate a single high-value target. Maxwell's political connections protected him, while Foster's whistleblowing made her a liability. Honorable discharge was the official term. Forced retirement, the reality. Military records sealed under national security protocols. Her testimony buried in classified hearings that went nowhere. The decorated war hero vanished from military records, reinventing herself as an educator focused on African American history and systemic oppression, subjects she understood from both academic study and lived experience. In the present day, as morning light filtered through the small window of her detention cell, Imani opened her eyes to find Detective Washington studying her through the observation window. The door opened to admit a slender Asian man in his 40s briefcase, clutched tightly as he approached. "Professor Foster, I'm Michael Chen. I'll be representing you." Recognition flashed across his features as he properly saw her face. He stopped himself, glancing at the observation cameras. "We've met before, in a classified setting." Imani nodded once, expression revealing nothing. "From the JAG Corps, if I recall correctly. You were present during certain testimony I provided regarding operational irregularities." Chen's composed exterior slipped momentarily, revealing astonishment. "That was 15 years ago. I never expected to see you again, especially not." He gestured to the detention cell. "Times change, counselor. Circumstances evolve." Her voice remained measured, betraying none of the tension coursing through her. "What are the charges?" "They're pushing for attempted murder of a police officer. D.A. Reed is holding a press conference this afternoon to announce formal charges." Chen's expression darkened. "This case stinks to high heaven. Officer Rankin has 6 prior excessive force complaints against black civilians, all dismissed without investigation. And now Officer Torres has given a preliminary statement that contradicts the official report. He says Rankin recognized your name and whispered something about the chief mentioned her before the situation escalated." Washington entered with a file tucked under her arm, closing the door firmly behind her. "There's more. Rankin specifically targeted you, Professor Foster. This wasn't a random stop. Torres confirms they were 3 blocks away when Rankin suddenly changed direction to follow your vehicle. Said he had a hunch about the driver." "Not surprising," Imani replied calmly. "I've been organizing community resistance against Victor Hargrove's development project, the one that would displace 300 families in the Oak Creek neighborhood, predominantly black families whose properties suddenly face mysterious code violations or tax reassessments." Washington's eyebrows rose. "Hargrove has considerable influence with city officials, including our police chief." "Follow the money, detective," Imani suggested. "Corruption leaves financial footprints." Their conversation halted as a uniformed officer entered, announcing that District Attorney Jackson Reed had arrived with paperwork for formal charges. The broad-shouldered white man strode in with cameras trailing behind him, a clear protocol violation that no one dared mention. His $1,000 suit and campaign-ready smile betrayed political ambitions beyond his current position. "Professor Foster," he addressed her with performative solemnity for the cameras. "You're being charged with attempted murder of a police officer, aggravated assault, resisting arrest, and illegal possession of a firearm." Chen immediately objected. "My client's firearm is legally registered, and she has a valid concealed carry permit." Reed's smile never reached his eyes. "Perhaps, but we have reason to believe Professor Foster has a hidden past that makes her possession of any weapon questionable. A history of violence, one might say." The implication hung in the air as reporters scribbled notes eagerly. "You're reaching Reed," Washington interjected, "and allowing media into an active investigation area violates at least 6 departmental policies." Reed turned his camera-ready smile toward Washington. "Detective, given your personal background, perhaps you should consider whether you can remain objective in a case involving racial elements. I'll be speaking with Chief Parker about reassigning this investigation." The thinly veiled threat silenced the room momentarily. Washington, a decorated detective with an impeccable record, being questioned because she shared the same skin color as the accused. The racial dynamics couldn't be more explicit. Have you ever noticed how quickly the system closes ranks when challenged? I know many of you watching have experienced similar moments of injustice. Comment number 1 if you've witnessed racial profiling firsthand, or number 2, if you believe our justice system treats everyone equally. Hit that like button if you think Imani was right to defend herself, and subscribe to follow this story to its shocking conclusion. What would you do if targeted by the very people sworn to protect you? As the cameras continued rolling in the detention center, no one noticed the slight smile playing at the corner of Imani's lips. Detective Washington might have been the only person in the room who recognized the expression for what it was. Not fear, not resignation, but the calculated patience of a predator assessing its opponents before striking. The question wasn't whether Imani Foster would fight back against the system targeting her, but how many would fall when she did. The courthouse buzzed with tension as Imani Foster, wrists and ankles shackled, despite her attorney's objections, was led into the arraignment hearing. The gallery divided visibly. White faces predominantly filling the prosecution side, black community members crowding behind the defense table. Judge Harriet Coleman, her steel gray hair framing a face known for harsh sentences against minority defendants, peered down from the bench with thinly veiled contempt. Bail hearing for case number 2024 CR 7845, State v. Imani Foster. The clerk announced as Chen rose to his feet. Your Honor, my client has deep community ties as a respected educator with no prior criminal record. She poses no flight risk and should be released on her own recognizance pending trial. District Attorney Reed approached the podium with theatrical gravity. Your Honor, what Mr. Chen conveniently omits is that Imani Foster is not who she appears to be. Our office has received information regarding Ms. Foster's hidden military background, specifically her training as a lethal operative in Special Forces. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as Reed continued. This defendant possesses specialized combat skills that make her an extreme danger to the community. She's already demonstrated willingness to use those skills against law enforcement. Chen objected immediately. Your Honor, the prosecution is deliberately mischaracterizing my client's honorable military service to prejudice the court. Furthermore, any reference to classified military records without proper declassification is potentially illegal. Judge Coleman waved away the objection. The court needs to consider all relevant factors when assessing community safety, Mr. Chen. Bail is denied. Defendant will remain in custody until trial. As Coleman's gavel fell sealing Imani's immediate fate, reporters rushed from the courtroom to broadcast the latest development. Within hours, local news chyrons proclaimed, "Former military assassin attacks police officer during traffic stop." The deliberate distortion of Imani's distinguished service record spread across social media platforms. Comment sections filling with accusations of anti-American sentiment and radical agenda. Outside the courthouse, demonstrations formed along racial lines. Black community members carrying signs demanding justice, while counter-protesters waved thin blue line flags and shouted support for Officer Rankin. At the police station, Officer Torres sat alone in the break room smartphone, displaying the media coverage with increasing discomfort. The narrative bore little resemblance to what he'd witnessed that night. His troubled reflection was interrupted as Chief Parker entered, accompanied by Officer Rankin, now walking with an exaggerated limp, despite medical reports indicating no significant mobility impairment. "Torres, my office, now." Parker's tone left no room for discussion. Inside the wood-paneled office, Parker closed the blinds before addressing the rookie officer. "Your written statement regarding the Foster incident lacks certain details, Officer Torres." Rankin loomed near the door, arms crossed. "I included everything relevant, sir," Torres replied, aware of the dangerous ground he navigated. "The dashcam malfunction was unfortunate, but—" "Let me be clear," Parker interrupted, leaning across the desk. "Officer Rankin is a decorated member of this department. His account of being ambushed by Foster is the official position we're taking. Any contradictory statements could damage the department's reputation and our case against a dangerous individual." The implied threat hung in the air as Torres swallowed hard. "I understand, sir." "Good. We'll need you to amend your statement to align with Officer Rankin's account, for consistency." Parker slid a prepared document across the desk. "The DA needs this today." After Torres left with the amended statement reluctantly tucked into his uniform pocket, Parker turned to Rankin. "Hargrove is getting nervous. This Foster situation is drawing too much attention to the development project." Rankin nodded. "We've contained it. Foster will be convicted, made an example of. The neighborhood organization she built will collapse without her." Neither man noticed Detective Washington standing in the shadow of the hallway recording device capturing their conversation. Later that evening, Washington met her former partner, now retired, Detective James Miller, at a diner 20 miles outside city limits. "This goes deeper than a bad traffic stop, James," she explained, sliding a file across the table. "I found security footage from the municipal parking garage showing Chief Parker meeting with Victor Hargrove the night before Foster was arrested. No record of the meeting in Parker's official calendar." Miller whistled low. "Hargrove's the developer trying to bulldoze Oak Creek for that luxury complex, right? Wasn't Foster organizing the community against him?" Washington nodded. "And here's where it gets interesting. I pulled Rankin's financial records. 3 deposits of $20,000 each over the past 6 months from a shell company that traces back to Hargrove Properties. They're targeting community leaders to clear the way for development," Miller concluded. "Classic gentrification tactics with a badge and gun. I need to get this to Chen, but I'm being watched. Parker's assigned Detective Miller to assist with my investigation, basically monitor and suppress anything that contradicts their narrative." As Washington worked to uncover the conspiracy, Imani faced new dangers inside detention. Returning from a shower, she found 3 inmates waiting in her cell. "Officer said you're a cop lover," the largest woman sneered, makeshift blade glinting in her hand. "Said you needed to be taught respect." What followed lasted less than 30 seconds. When guards responded to the commotion, they found 3 attackers subdued with minimal force. One with a dislocated shoulder, another with a precisely hyperextended elbow, the third simply unconscious from a carotid restraint applied with expert precision. Imani stood calmly in the center of the cell, not a hair out of place. "They'll need medical attention," she informed the shocked guards. "None of the injuries are permanent." The guard's body camera mysteriously malfunctioned during the incident, though rumors of Foster's fighting abilities spread throughout the facility, ensuring no one else attempted similar attacks. Meanwhile, Michael Chen received an unexpected visitor at his law office, a distinguished black man in his 60s wearing an impeccably tailored suit with a small American flag pin. "Mr. Chen, General Marcus Williams, United States Army, retired. I understand you're representing Imani Foster." Chen's surprise was evident as he ushered the decorated military leader into his office. "General Williams, this is unexpected. May I ask how you're connected to Professor Foster?" Williams' expression remained neutral. "Master Sergeant Foster served under my command for several classified operations. When I learned of her current situation, I felt compelled to intervene. What I'm about to share is technically still classified, but I've decided certain truths outweigh bureaucratic secrecy." For the next hour, Williams detailed how Imani's team had uncovered an international money laundering operation connecting military contractors, police departments, and real estate developers across multiple cities. The investigation was shut down by political pressure before we could complete it. Foster's whistleblowing made her powerful enemies. Her military records were sealed and her career destroyed to protect people profiting from these schemes. Chen's legal pad filled with notes as Williams continued. "The same shell companies Foster identified years ago are operating in Oak Ridge. Hargrove's development isn't just displacing black residents. It's laundering money from overseas interests through artificially inflated property values." As evening fell across Oak Ridge, Detective Washington, working unofficially after her suspension, connected financial records from Hargrove's development company to the same shell corporations identified in Imani's aborted military investigation. The conspiracy wasn't just local. It stretched across state lines involving multiple police departments, political figures, and development companies, systematically targeting predominantly black neighborhoods for gentrification, using law enforcement as muscle to intimidate community leaders. The system wasn't simply biased, it was weaponized. Raindrops pelted Detective Washington as she hurried through the police headquarters parking garage manila envelope tucked beneath her jacket. Her suspension had become official that morning. pending investigation into procedural violations. But her department keycard still worked, allowing her to slip inside through a service entrance. The late hour ensured minimal personnel as she made her way to the evidence room, nodding casually to the night shift dispatcher who barely looked up from his crossword puzzle. Washington had discovered something crucial while reviewing traffic camera footage from streets adjacent to Imani's traffic stop. Though the patrol car's cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned, a bank security camera at the intersection had captured partial footage of the incident. The grainy video clearly showed Rankin drawing his weapon, first contradicting his sworn testimony. As Washington slipped into the evidence processing room, she froze at the sound of voices from the adjoining office. "The Foster evidence needs to disappear, Miller. Anything supporting her self-defense claim, especially that witness statement from the apartment complex." Chief Parker's voice carried clearly through the thin wall. Detective Scott Miller, Washington's replacement, responded with bureaucratic efficiency. "Already handled, sir. The witness recanted after we explained the seriousness of making false statements. The ballistics report has been amended to support Rankin's timeline." "Good. Reed needs a clean case. This goes beyond Foster. We need to send a message to anyone else thinking about interfering with progress in this city." Parker's chair creaked as he leaned back. "Hargrove's project brings in $40 million in tax revenue and creates 200 jobs. The mayor's entire economic revitalization platform depends on it." "What about Torres?" Miller asked. "He's wavering. Keeps asking questions about the dashcam footage." "Rookie idealism," Parker dismissed. "Rankin's handling him. By trial time, he'll understand where his loyalty needs to be." Washington retreated silently, evidence on collected mind racing. The conspiracy was broader than she'd imagined, reaching into every level of local government. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Torres sat in his apartment staring at the thumb drive in his palm. Against regulations, he'd copied the original dashcam footage before it was corrupted, footage clearly showing Rankin's unprovoked aggression and Imani's justified self-defense. His police academy ethics instructor's words echoed in his mind, "Your highest duty is to justice, not to other officers." The weight of that duty pressed heavily as Torres contemplated career suicide against moral compromise. At the detention center, Imani received another visitor, her former student, now Professor Aisha Johnson, bringing graded papers as a pretense to whisper crucial information. "Washington found a witness from the apartment complex overlooking your traffic stop. Elderly woman named Mrs. Reynolds captured the entire incident on her cell phone. She's terrified to come forward after officers visited her home." Imani nodded almost imperceptibly. "Tell Washington to have Chen petition for electronic monitoring instead of detention. Judge Coleman will deny it, but it creates an appeal pathway and gets this into federal court where Parker and Reed have less influence." As Johnson left, a guard delivered a message. Imani's presence was requested in the administrative office. There, a distinguished woman in an Army uniform waited, accompanied by 2 military police officers. "Master Sergeant Foster," the woman addressed her with formal respect, despite the prison jumpsuit. "I'm Colonel Rebecca Winters, Judge Advocate General's office. I've been authorized to inform you that your request for declassification of service records has been denied on national security grounds." Imani's expression remained neutral. "As expected, Colonel, the military protects its own, particularly those with political connections." Winters glanced at the guards before responding quietly, "Not all of us agree with this decision, Sergeant. General Williams is working channels behind the scenes. These things take time. Time is a luxury I don't currently possess, Colonel." After Winters departed, Imani was escorted back to her cell to find it thoroughly searched, her few personal items confiscated for security reasons. The message was clear. The system was applying pressure from every direction. That night, Torres found himself working a late shift with Rankin, patrolling Oak Creek neighborhood, where tension had been building since Imani's arrest. Community members gathered on porches, watching the patrol car with undisguised hostility. "See that?" Rankin gestured toward the residents. Foster riled these people up, filled their heads with nonsense about discrimination and rights. They need to understand their place. Torres remained silent, knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. Parker wants us to start hitting this neighborhood hard, Rankin continued. Traffic stops, loitering citations, noise complaints, anything to make it uncomfortable. Once property values drop, enough Hargrove can swoop in with buyout offers they can't refuse. That's targeted harassment, Torres finally responded. Nothing in the penal code about where we choose to enforce the law. Rankin shrugged. It's strategic policing. As they turned down an empty street, Rankin's phone rang. His side of the conversation was brief but alarming. Yes, sir. No, he hasn't been a problem. Understood. I'll handle it. After hanging up, Rankin directed Torres to drive to an abandoned warehouse district. Parker needs us to check out a potential break-in. Torres's instincts screamed warning as they pulled into the deserted area. No dispatch call had come through their radio. This stop existed outside official channels. Why don't you take the west entrance? Rankin suggested, hand resting casually near his weapon. I'll cover the east. The setup couldn't be more obvious. Torres was being led to a secluded location by a partner now watching him with predatory calculation. Actually, Torres replied, hand moving to his body camera. Protocol requires we stay together when investigating unsecured locations. I'm activating my body cam for evidentiary purposes. Rankin's expression darkened. That won't be necessary. This is just a quick check. I insist, Torres replied, camera light now blinking, for both our protection. The standoff lasted several tense seconds before Rankin forced a laugh. Always by the book, rookie. Fine, let's head back to the station instead. This was probably a false alarm. The next morning, Torres approached Chen's law office through the back entrance thumb drive clutched in his palm. I need guarantees, he insisted once inside. Immunity from prosecution, whistleblower protection, and relocation assistance. Chen studied the young officer carefully. That depends on what you're offering, Officer Torres. Everything, the original dashcam footage, recordings of Parker and Rankin discussing the targeting of Foster specifically, documentation of the department's systematic harassment of Oak Creek residents to facilitate Hargrove's development. Torres's hands trembled slightly. They tried to kill me last night. Rankin was setting me up for an accident on Parker's orders. Chen immediately called Washington, now working unofficially from her apartment. Within hours, they had assembled a formidable collection of evidence. Torres's recordings, Washington's financial documents linking Parker to Hargrove, witness statements from Oak Creek residents documenting patterns of police harassment coinciding with development plans, and most crucially, Mrs. Reynolds' cell phone video showing the entire traffic stop incident from her apartment window. The evidence painted a damning picture of corruption reaching from patrol officers to the mayor's office, all connected through Hargrove's development company. As Washington compiled the evidence for presentation to the FBI's Public Corruption Division, her apartment door splintered inward, 3 masked figures rushing inside with weapons drawn. The attack was coordinated and professional, but so was Washington's response. Former military herself, she disabled the first attacker with a lamp-cord garrote, used his body as a shield against the second, and barricaded herself in the bathroom before the third could corner her. Gunshots splintered the bathroom door as Washington escaped through the window evidence drive, clutched in her bleeding hand. Across town, Torres failed to report for his shift. His apartment found empty with signs of hasty departure. Parker convened an emergency meeting with Rankin and Miller. "This is spiraling," he hissed, pacing his office. "Washington survived the hit team and disappeared with evidence. Torres is in the wind, likely with recordings. We need containment strategies immediately." Miller cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Sir, this has escalated beyond department issues. We're talking about conspiracy to commit murder of fellow officers. I didn't sign up for—" Parker cut him off with a raised hand. "You're either with us completely, Miller, or you're a liability. There's no middle ground here." The implied threat hung in the air as Miller nodded reluctantly. "I understand, sir." None of them noticed the small recording device Washington had planted beneath Parker's desk weeks earlier, capturing every incriminating word for Chen's growing evidence file. The courthouse steps teemed with protesters and counter-protesters. Barricades barely containing the tension as Imani Foster, now 2 months into her detention, was escorted inside for the first day of trial. Media trucks lined the street, satellite dishes extended skyward like mechanical sunflowers, tracking the most explosive story to hit Oak Ridge in decades. Inside the packed courtroom, District Attorney Reed arranged his papers with theatrical precision, occasionally acknowledging supportive nods from the predominantly white jury, a jury composition Chen had vigorously but unsuccessfully challenged through 3 rounds of motions. Judge Coleman entered her black robe swirling as she took her position on the bench gavel, striking with authority that silenced the gallery instantly. Case number 2024 CR 7845, State versus Imani Foster, the clerk announced as Coleman peered over her reading glasses. "Opening statements, Mr. Reed." The district attorney approached the jury box with practiced confidence, his $1,000 suit and campaign-ready smile projecting trustworthiness. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is fundamentally about respect for law and order. Officer James Rankin, a decorated 12-year veteran of the Oak Ridge Police Department, was simply performing his duty when the defendant Imani Foster made a calculated decision to open fire rather than comply with lawful commands." Reed paced deliberately before the jury. "The evidence will show that Ms. Foster is not the simple community college professor she pretends to be, but rather a trained military operative with specialized combat skills who harbors deep anti-authority sentiments. When confronted with legitimate law enforcement, she resorted to violence instead of cooperation." For 20 minutes, Reed painted Imani as a radical with an agenda, a dangerous individual hiding behind an academic facade, deliberately omitting the context of her military service and the circumstances of her honorable discharge. When Chen finally rose for the defense opening, Judge Coleman interrupted immediately. "Mr. Chen, the court reminds you that any reference to classified military information will result in contempt charges." The limitation was strategically crippling, preventing Chen from explaining the context of Imani's training or her whistleblowing history that might establish pattern and motive for the current situation. Nevertheless, Chen approached the jury with measured determination. "This case is indeed about respect for truth, for rights, and for justice. The evidence will show that Professor Foster was targeted specifically by Officer Rankin, that she was subjected to escalating aggression without cause, and that she acted in legitimate self-defense when faced with imminent deadly threat." Chen gestured toward Imani, who sat with perfect posture at the defense table, her calm demeanor contrasting sharply with Reed's characterization of a dangerous radical. "Professor Foster has dedicated her life first to serving her country, then to educating young people about history and justice. When you hear the complete truth about what happened during that traffic stop, you will understand that she had no choice but to defend herself against an unprovoked attack." The prosecution's case began with a parade of character witnesses for Officer Rankin. Fellow officers testifying to his professionalism, community members describing his involvement in youth sports programs, and supervisors praising his record. None mentioned the 6 excessive force complaints buried in his personnel file information Judge Coleman had ruled inadmissible as prejudicial. Then came the technical experts testifying about the unfortunately corrupted dashcam footage, explaining how such malfunctions occasionally occur in patrol vehicles. The prosecution presented edited body cam snippets showing only the aftermath of the shooting, carefully excluding the crucial moments preceding the first shot. Officer Torres, under subpoena, took the stand with visible reluctance. Under Reed's questioning, he provided the carefully scripted testimony Parker had demanded, though his eyes never met Imani's across the courtroom. During cross-examination, Chen approached cautiously. "Officer Torres, did you witness Officer Rankin draw his weapon first during this encounter?" Before Torres could answer, Reed objected vehemently. "Calls for speculation about sequence of events not in evidence." Judge Coleman sustained the objection, effectively blocking Chen from extracting the truth Torres might be willing to provide under direct questioning. As the trial's first week concluded, the prosecution's narrative dominated media coverage. Commentators debated whether Imani's military background constituted a public danger, with few mentioning the questionable circumstances of the traffic stop itself or the missing video evidence. In her detention cell, Imani maintained her disciplined routine: meditation at dawn, physical exercises within the confined space, and strategic planning during the long evening hours. She received a message from Washington through Chen. "Mrs. Reynolds intimidated into leaving town. Torres wavering under pressure. Need game changer." Imani's response was 4 words: "Tell Williams it's time." The trial's second week brought Rankin himself to the stand, his uniform pressed to perfection, department commendations prominently displayed. His testimony presented a masterclass in calculated deception, technical truths arranged to create a false narrative, emotional appeals strategically deployed to sway jurors, and just enough professional jargon to establish authority without alienating his audience. "I approached the vehicle following standard protocol," Rankin testified, voice steady but with a subtle undertone of trauma. The defendant became immediately confrontational, refusing simple commands and making threatening movements. "When I observed her reaching toward what appeared to be a weapon, I followed my training to protect myself and my partner." Reed guided him skillfully through the narrative. "And then what happened, Officer Rankin?" "She drew a concealed firearm and began shooting without warning or provocation." Rankin replied, hand unconsciously moving to his shoulder where the bullet had struck. "I felt the impact here. Then another shot hit my leg. I remember thinking I might never see my family again." Several jurors nodded sympathetically, exactly as Reed had intended. Chen's cross-examination faced constant interruption from both Reed's objections and Coleman's hostile rulings. Every attempt to highlight inconsistencies in Rankin's account was stymied by the judge's interventions. When Chen tried to introduce Torres's initial statement contradicting Rankin's version of events, Coleman excluded it as hearsay not subject to exceptions. The prosecution's case appeared airtight despite its foundation of manipulated evidence and coerced testimony. During a court recess, Chen whispered to Imani, "We need a miracle. The jury's buying Rankin's performance completely." Imani's response was calm, almost serene. "Miracles are rarely needed when truth has patience, counselor. The opposition has reached maximum extension. Now they're vulnerable to counterattack." Her military assessment of the legal battlefield would prove prophetic sooner than anyone expected. "Do you see how the system works to protect itself? When those in power feel threatened, they manipulate every level of justice to maintain control." Comment number 1. If you believe Imani's military experience is being unfairly used against her, or number 2, if you think her training makes her more dangerous. Hit that like button if you're outraged by the missing evidence, and subscribe to see the shocking way this conspiracy unravels. How far would you go to expose corruption if you were in Imani's position? As the prosecution prepared to rest its case, Reed remained unaware that Torres had been secretly meeting with FBI agents providing comprehensive testimony about the department's corruption. Unaware that Washington had recovered from her injuries and delivered substantial evidence to federal prosecutors. Unaware that General Williams had finally secured declassification of key portions of Imani's military record that would destroy the prosecution's characterization of her as anti-authority radical. The system believed it was winning, but Imani Foster had been trained to turn apparent defeat into decisive victory. The counterattack was about to begin. Rain lashed against the courthouse windows as week 3 of the trial began, thunder punctuating the tension building inside courtroom 3. District Attorney Reed approached the bench with confident finality. "The state rests your honor." Judge Coleman turned toward the defense table. "Mr. Chen, you may call your first witness." Chen rose with renewed confidence. "The defense calls Officer Kevin Torres." Reed's eyebrows shot upward as Torres entered through the rear doors, now accompanied by two unfamiliar men in dark suits rather than fellow officers. "Objections, Your," Reed sputtered. "Officer Torres has already testified for the prosecution. This constitutes badgering and harassment of the witness." Chen remained unruffled. "Your Honor, Officer Torres is being recalled as a hostile witness for the defense with significant new evidence relevant to this case." Coleman frowned deeply. "Approach the bench counselors." As both attorneys moved forward, Chen spoke in hushed tones. "Your Honor, Officer Torres has provided sworn statements to federal authorities contradicting his previous testimony. He is now prepared to testify truthfully under penalty of perjury regarding events directly relevant to this case." Reed's face flushed crimson. "This is ambush tactics, Your Honor. The defense is clearly attempting to—" "Mr. Reed," Chen interrupted calmly. "Officer Torres is accompanied by FBI Special Agents Morgan and Patel. They're prepared to inform the court that Officer Torres has been granted federal immunity in exchange for his testimony regarding corruption within the Oak Ridge Police Department directly connected to this case." Coleman's expression shifted from dismissive to concerned as she noted the federal agent standing at the courtroom's rear doors. "The witness may testify," she ruled reluctantly. "But I warn you, Mr. Chen, this had better be directly relevant." Torres took the stand, visibly nervous but determined. Under Chen's questioning, he revealed the truth of the traffic stop, how Rankin had deliberately targeted Imani's vehicle, how he had recognized her name and the chief mentioned her, and most critically how Rankin had drawn his weapon first without provocation. "Officer Rankin fired the first shot," Torres testified firmly. "Professor Foster only drew her weapon after being fired upon. Her return fire was controlled and deliberate. She could have killed Officer Rankin, but chose instead to disable him with non-lethal wounds." The courtroom erupted as Torres continued describing how the dashcam footage had been deliberately corrupted, how he had been pressured to change his statement, and how Chief Parker had explicitly instructed officers to target residents of Oak Creek neighborhood to facilitate Hargrove's development project. "I recorded a conversation between Chief Parker and Officer Rankin in the department parking garage 3 nights before this trial began." Torres concluded, voice steady despite the career suicide he was committing. "They specifically mentioned finishing what we started with Foster and discussed how her conviction would destroy the neighborhood organization opposing Hargrove's development." Reed objected repeatedly, but the dam had broken. Judge Coleman, suddenly aware of potential judicial misconduct charges if she continued obstructing legitimate testimony, allowed Torres to continue. After Torres stepped down, Chen called his next witness, Mrs. Gladys Reynolds, the 76-year-old grandmother who had recorded the entire traffic stop from her apartment window. "I may be old, but my eyes still work just fine," she testified with unwavering certainty. "That officer pulled his gun first. No provocation whatsoever. The lady kept her hands visible the whole time until he shot at her." Reynolds' cell phone video, finally admitted into evidence over Reed's desperate objections, clearly showed the sequence Chen had claimed all along: Rankin drawing, first firing without provocation, and Imani responding with controlled precision rather than panicked violence. The prosecution's case collapsed further when Chen called his next witness, General Marcus Williams, now cleared to testify about Imani's military service after the Pentagon's declassification decision. "Master Sergeant Foster was one of the finest soldiers under my command," Williams testified with military precision. "Her record includes the Bronze Star, 2 Purple Hearts, and numerous commendations for operations that saved American lives. Her discharge came after she reported unethical conduct by a superior officer who ordered unnecessary civilian casualties during an operation." As Williams detailed Imani's whistleblowing against military corruption, the parallels to her current situation became unmistakable. Master Sergeant Foster's military training emphasized minimum necessary force and protection of innocent life, principles she appears to have followed precisely during the encounter with Officer Rankin. During the lunch recess, Reed huddled with his increasingly concerned team. "We need damage control immediately. Contact Parker and have him prepare contingencies for Torres's allegations." Unknown to Reed, Teed. Detective Washington had returned from hiding working with federal agents to execute search warrants on Parker's office, Rankin's residence, and Hargrove's corporate headquarters simultaneously. When court resumed, Reed attempted to salvage his case through aggressive cross-examination of Williams, questioning whether Imani's combat training made her reactions instinctively lethal rather than defensive. "General Kemp," Reed pressed, "isn't it true that someone with Professor Foster's training reacts with potentially deadly force automatically when threatened?" Williams's response was measured but devastating. "Mr. Reed, your characterization fundamentally misunderstands special operations training. Master Sergeant Foster's expertise isn't in killing. It's in threat assessment and proportional response. Her actions during the traffic stop demonstrate textbook restraint and precision. Had she intended to kill Officer Rankin, he would unquestionably be dead." As the defense continued presenting evidence, the courthouse erupted in chaos when FBI agents entered the courtroom with arrest warrants for Chief Parker and District Attorney Reed himself. The charges, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and corruption, stemmed from financial records Washington had uncovered showing both men received payments from Hargrove's shell companies. Judge Coleman's face drained of color as an agent approached her bench with a separate warrant. The FBI had discovered her husband's architectural firm received exclusive contracts for Hargrove's development project, contracts contingent on her handling specific cases appropriately. Coleman immediately declared a recess and recused herself from the case. Within hours, federal judge Raymond Ortiz took over, reviewing the case with mounting concern over the constitutional violations and corruption exposed. Outside the courtroom, Rankin attempted to flee the jurisdiction upon learning of Parker's arrest. At the bus terminal, he encountered Imani's former student, Professor Aisha Johnson, who recognized him despite his attempt at disguise. Their confrontation drew security officers who detained Rankin until police arrived. When searched, he carried $40,000 in cash and a one-way ticket to Mexico. The trial's final days unfolded in a completely transformed atmosphere. Judge Ortiz, a respected federal jurist with no connections to local politics, reviewed the complete evidence, including previously suppressed materials. Detective Washington testified about the financial connections between Hargrove's development company and city officials. Federal agents presented records showing systematic targeting of black property owners throughout Oak Creek, including fraudulent code violations, selective enforcement, and intimidation tactics, all designed to depress property values for Hargrove's benefit. When Imani finally took the stand, her testimony was delivered with the same precision and control she had shown throughout her military career and academic life. She described the traffic stop exactly as the video had shown, explained her decision-making process when faced with Rankin's unprovoked attack, and connected her community organizing to the larger pattern of displacement targeting black neighborhoods. "I used the minimum force necessary to neutralize an imminent lethal threat," she concluded. Officer Rankin's wounds were precisely placed to disable without causing permanent damage or death, consistent with my training and ethical principles. After deliberating less than 4 hours, the jury returned with their verdict, not guilty on all charges. As Imani stood to receive the verdict, her posture reflected not triumph, but solemn vindication. The battle had been won, but the war against systemic injustice continued. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed as Imani addressed the waiting crowd, her words measured and forward-looking rather than celebratory. Today's verdict isn't just about one traffic stop or one individual. It's about exposing systems of corruption that target communities of color for displacement and exploitation. The fight for true justice has only begun. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the federal courthouse as Imani Foster took her seat in the witness box for the fourth consecutive day of testimony. Unlike her criminal trial where she had been the defendant, now she served as the key witness in a sweeping RICO case against the corrupt network connecting Oak Ridge officials, developers, and police leadership. United States Attorney Carolyn Diaz approached with another exhibit. "Ms. Foster, can you identify this document?" Imani studied the spreadsheet projected on the courtroom screen. "This appears to be the financial analysis I compiled while organizing Oak Creek residents. It tracks the correlation between police enforcement activities and property devaluations in predominantly black neighborhoods over a 5-year period." The document joined hundreds of others as evidence in what media now called the Oak Ridge Conspiracy, a case expanding daily as new connections emerged between Hargrove's development company and similar operations in 6 other cities. Former Chief Parker, facing 30 years in federal prison, had begun cooperating, providing investigators with names, dates, and account numbers connecting local corruption to national patterns. Rankin maintained his innocence despite overwhelming evidence, his defiance crumbling only when prosecutors revealed body cam footage he believed destroyed. Footage showing him explicitly discussing targeting troublemakers who opposed Hargrove's development. Former District Attorney Reed negotiated a plea agreement, resignation, and disbarment included in exchange for testimony against higher-level conspirators. Judge Coleman faced her own federal indictment for judicial misconduct and corruption. Detective Washington, reinstated with commendation, headed a new police integrity division tasked with reviewing every case touched by corrupt officers. Officer Torres, despite initially facing hostility from fellow officers, found support from reform-minded colleagues grateful for exposing corruption that had tainted their department. For the community, vindication came with practical justice. Hargrove's development project canceled his properties seized under federal forfeiture laws. The Justice Department established a victims fund for residents who had faced harassment, fraudulent code violations, or property devaluation through targeted enforcement. National media descended on Oak Ridge, investigating similar patterns in cities across America where gentrification targeted communities of color through weaponized law enforcement and corrupt local government. Professor Aisha Johnson expanded her academic research to document these patterns, working with Imani to develop community-resistant strategies applicable nationwide. The FBI investigation expanded further after discovering Hargrove's connection to international investors using real estate development for money laundering. Exactly the pattern Imani had identified years earlier during her military service. General Williams testified before a congressional committee about how Foster's original whistleblowing had been suppressed by political interests protecting profitable corruption schemes. Master Sergeant Foster identified this pattern 15 years ago, Williams testified. Had her reports been properly investigated, then millions of dollars in damages to vulnerable communities could have been prevented. In Oak Ridge, community healing began slowly. Town hall meetings brought residents together across racial lines to discuss police reform, housing protection, and rebuilding trust. Some officers resigned in protest over the vilification of law enforcement, while others embraced reform, acknowledging the damage done by corruption in their ranks. Imani offered numerous national platforms and book deals focused instead on rebuilding her community college program and expanding education about systemic discrimination and citizen empowerment. Her classes filled beyond capacity, with students seeking to understand the larger context of what had happened in their city. Torres, initially reluctant to be viewed as a hero, eventually accepted Imani's invitation to guest lecture about ethical decision-making in law enforcement. His first-hand account of resisting pressure to participate in corruption became a powerful teaching tool for future officers. 6 months after her acquittal, Imani testified for the final time in federal court, providing expert analysis connecting Oak Ridge's corruption to identical patterns in other jurisdictions. Her military intelligence background, once used to vilify her, now provided crucial expertise in tracing complex financial relationships between seemingly disconnected entities. After her testimony concluded, United States Attorney Diaz approached privately. "The Attorney General has authorized me to offer you a formal apology for the government's failure to protect you after your military whistleblowing. Your security clearance has been reinstated and your military record amended to reflect honorable service without the redactions that obscured your accomplishments." Imani accepted the apology with characteristic grace. "The system eventually corrected itself, Ms. Diaz. Delayed justice is still justice." "We'd like to offer you a position with the Justice Department," Diaz continued. "Your unique background would be invaluable to our Public Corruption Task Force." Imani smiled slightly. "I appreciate the offer, but my place is in the classroom and the community. The most effective change happens from the ground up, not the top down." That evening, as Imani drove home from campus, she noticed a police cruiser in her rearview mirror. The momentary tension, muscle memory from that fateful night, dissolved as the young officer approached with appropriate respect, explaining that her tail light needed replacement. The officer, a recent academy graduate, wore a small pin indicating completion of the new community relations training program Imani had helped develop. "Professor Foster," the officer acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Just wanted to make sure you're aware of the light. Have a good evening." As the cruiser pulled away, Imani watched with measured optimism. The system hadn't transformed overnight, but cracks in its foundation had been exposed, creating space for reform to take root. The battle for justice extended far beyond her individual case, a reality she had understood long before the night her past and present collided during a routine traffic stop that proved anything but routine. 1 year after the shots that echoed through Oak Ridge, Imani Foster stood behind a podium in the community center, bearing a fresh coat of paint and renewed purpose. Before her sat an audience spanning generations and backgrounds. Elderly residents who had witnessed decades of neighborhood change, young activists energized by recent events, and a growing contingent of police officers participating in what had become nationally recognized as the Oak Ridge model of community-oriented policing reform. "Justice isn't an achievement to be completed," Imani addressed the gathered crowd, her voice carrying the same measured authority that had commanded elite military units and captivated college classrooms. "It's a continuous process requiring vigilance education and community engagement. What happened in Oak Ridge wasn't unique. It was simply exposed rather than concealed." The community center now housed the Justice Education Institute, founded with settlement funds from the federal case against Hargrove and his conspirators. The institute provided legal education for residents training for law enforcement and research, documenting patterns of discriminatory development practices nationwide. Imani directed the institute while maintaining her teaching position, refusing more lucrative offers from prestigious universities and think tanks. "My purpose hasn't changed," she often explained. "Only the scope of my classroom has expanded." The institute's most successful program, the Community Defense Training Curriculum, taught residents their legal rights during police encounters, proper documentation of official interactions, and community organizing strategies against predatory development. Officers participating in the program learned the historical context of police-community relations in Black neighborhoods and strategies for de-escalation and trust building. Officer Torres had initially joined reluctantly, expecting hostility from community members. Instead, he found respect for his courage in breaking the blue wall of silence and genuine interest in his perspective on reforming police culture from within. His presentations to cadets at the police academy became mandatory training, his personal journey from complicity to whistleblowing, illustrating the moral choices officers might face during their careers. "I stood by initially while injustice happened," Torres would tell each new class. "That silence made me complicit. Your badge carries authority, but your integrity determines how you'll use it." Detective Washington. Now Captain Washington, heading the department's newly established Integrity Division, implemented accountability measures that became a blueprint for departments nationwide. Every officer now wore body cameras that couldn't be deactivated during civilian encounters. An independent civilian review board with substantive authority reviewed use-of-force incidents. Recruitment efforts focused on building a department reflective of the community's diversity. The changes faced resistance. Some officers resigned rather than adapt to new standards. Police union representatives fought civilian oversight mechanisms, and conservative media decried the reforms as anti-police. Yet, crime rates remained stable, while civilian complaints decreased substantially, providing empirical support for the reform's effectiveness. Former Officer Rankin, convicted on multiple federal charges, including civil rights violations, corruption, and attempted murder, served his sentence in a medium-security facility far from Oak Ridge. His occasional interviews maintained his victimhood narrative, though few beyond fringe groups accepted his version of events after the extensive evidence presented during trials. Former Chief Parker, having cooperated extensively with federal investigations, received a reduced sentence but would never work in law enforcement again. His testimony helped prosecutors identify similar corruption patterns in departments across 3 states, leading to indictments against 12 police chiefs and 23 local government officials. The ripple effects extended to state legislatures where new laws strengthened protections against predatory development tactics and prohibited the use of code enforcement as a gentrification tool. Real estate developers now faced enhanced disclosure requirements regarding their funding sources and development impacts on existing communities. The Justice Department established a specialized task force focused on discriminatory housing practices, with Imani serving as a consulting expert. On the anniversary of the shooting, Imani drove her same Honda Civic through Oak Creek neighborhood, now stabilized through a community land trust established with settlement funds. Properties once targeted for demolition underwent renovation while maintaining affordability for original residents. Community gardens flourished on vacant lots previously slated for luxury condominiums. As Imani parked outside her modest home, a police cruiser slowed nearby. The young black female officer driving it offered a respectful nod, one of several officers who had grown up in Oak Creek and returned to serve the community after completing academy training. The moment symbolized the fragile but genuine progress being made. Not perfect justice, but movement toward greater accountability and representation. Inside her home, Imani found an unexpected letter bearing Pentagon letterhead. The Military Review Board had completed its reassessment of her whistleblowing case from 15 years earlier. Her actions, once deemed detrimental to unit cohesion, were now formally recognized as exemplary ethical conduct in accordance with highest military principles. The letter included notification of back pay, restoration of rank, and a formal commendation. The vindication, while welcome, felt almost anticlimactic after everything that had followed. That evening, Imani joined community members for a candlelight vigil honoring victims of police violence nationwide. As candles illuminated diverse faces gathered in solidarity, she reflected on the complex journey from that traffic stop to the present moment. The system hadn't been completely transformed. Injustice persisted, corruption still found shadows to inhabit, and vigilance remained necessary. Yet meaningful change had taken root in Oak Ridge, creating a model others could adapt to their communities. The work continues, Imani addressed the gathered crowd as the event concluded. What happened here wasn't just about one traffic stop or one corrupt conspiracy. It was about recognizing systems of oppression and having the courage to challenge them collectively. True justice requires sustained commitment across generations. As participants dispersed into the evening, Imani noticed a young girl watching her with undisguised admiration. "Ms. Foster." The child approached hesitantly. "I want to be like you when I grow up." Imani knelt to meet the girl's eyes. "Be yourself, but carry forward the work of justice in your own way. That's how change becomes permanent." Later, driving home through streets now patrolled by a reformed police department, Imani reflected on how a routine traffic stop had exposed corruption concealed beneath layers of official authority. The incident that nearly ended her life had instead created openings for transformation, not complete or perfect, but meaningful progress toward justice. Her military training had prepared her to survive that night, but her lifetime of fighting systemic discrimination had prepared her for the longer battle that followed. As she pulled into her driveway, Imani noticed a police cruiser passing slowly by her home, not in surveillance, but in protection. The young officer behind the wheel offered a respectful nod before continuing her patrol. The gesture symbolized the fragile but genuine progress their community had achieved. Not perfect justice, but movement toward a system where protection and service extended equally to all citizens, regardless of race or resources. What do you think about Imani's approach to creating lasting change? Has this story changed your perspective on how systems can be reformed from within? Comment below with your thoughts on whether community-based solutions like the Oak Ridge model could work in your area. If you believe stories exposing injustice need to be shared, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more content that challenges us to examine the systems around us. Thank you for joining me for The Badge and the Bullet. Remember that true justice requires both courage and community. Share this video if you know someone who needs to hear this story. Imani Foster's journey teaches us that true justice requires both personal courage and collective action. One person standing against corruption can spark change, but lasting transformation demands community solidarity. The story reveals how systems of oppression often work together. Police courts, developers, and politicians creating interlocking barriers against equity. When these systems target communities of color, the discrimination becomes more entrenched and difficult to dismantle. Yet Imani's approach shows that strategic resistance combining legal knowledge, community organizing, and documentation of injustice can effectively challenge even powerful opponents. Her military background provided unique skills, but her commitment to education and empowerment created sustainable change. Perhaps most importantly, the story demonstrates that reform must address root causes, not just individual bad actors. By establishing accountability structures, civilian oversight, and community-based alternatives. Oak Ridge transformed a moment of violence into a movement for justice. The path forward isn't perfect, resistance remains, and vigilance is necessary. But when people unite across differences to demand accountability, systems can indeed change from within and without. What systems of injustice exist in your community? And how might they be connected in ways that aren't immediately visible? Have you witnessed racial profiling or discriminatory practices that need exposure? Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or experiences. Your story matters in this ongoing conversation about justice. If this account of standing against corrupt power resonated with you, please hit that like button to help more people discover it. Subscribe to join our community dedicated to uncovering hidden truths and amplifying voices fighting for equity. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how discrimination operates through seemingly legitimate institutions. Thank you for bearing witness to Imani's story. May it inspire your own courage in confronting injustice wherever you encounter it. Remember, in the words of Imani Foster, true justice requires sustained commitment across generations.